Um, well, first of all, thank you all for being here. Crazy to me that everyone here is in a room to listen to me talk about painting. I feel like people used to come to my soccer games, but I never thought it would be like, oh, you're gonna listen to me talk about paintings. It's all very, very new to me. So I think that's honestly a bridge to your question in a sense, because I think that painting still feels very new to me, and the way that I approach it is not with a strict or harsh background or technique or sense of that I need to learn a specific lesson. It's like it is in its first moment intuitive, and that helps me overcome the fear of having to make a painting, to make a great work of art, is just to start. And I think when I needed it at the time in my life when painting sort of emerged, it was all about just kind of the materials and just doing the act itself. And then slowly I started to build a sense of intellect around what I was actually doing. But in the onset, it truly was just purely the act, just the color line, the way that the paint feels. Just a very sort of like hands-on, immersive approach, I guess.
So you would say you approach it in a more spontaneous way?
In the beginning. Yeah,
okay.
For sure.
And you talked about materials already, almost as if you knew my second question. Your paintings truly have so many layers and you can see so many materiality in them. So I wanted to hear from you a little bit about this materiality, this game of accumulation and then removing something what came before, which we talked about a lot in the past.
Yeah.
How does this play? How does this come around for you?
Well, I think based on what I just said about just starting, is that in the beginning I begin and I just start drawing really. And then over time, the experience of working, it accumulates in layers. And all these paintings have paintings that were there before them and are sort of referenced to me. When I look at them, I can see sort of their history on that surface. And so there's a sort of depth in that sense, as well as a physical depth where you can look into. There's also a depth of time. I think what really interests me about painting, as opposed to, say, like photography, is that, yes, it's a still image, as in it's not technically moving, but as opposed to photography, it feels like there's a certain duration of time that can be captured within that singular image. And I don't know how to really categorize it, almost like a vibration or something, that when you look at the piece or you return to it multiple times, there's a different experience that happens. And so I think that that viewing experience correlates also with the way that I work, because when you return to something over and over again, it's like there's a certain inevitability of whatever message that specific work is trying to say. And I can feel that when I'm making it. It's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, I want to find it, but on the other hand, it's difficult to always be seeking out the sort of end form of something. And it can be really gritty process where sometimes you just feel really lost, for sure.
So how do you know once you're done? Because we've seen your works in so many iterations. The red is right. We've seen it. The first time I saw it, it was completely different than what it is today.
I think for these specific works, I was looking for a more coherent, specific image, I would say. And when I'm working in the beginning, it's really, I'm feeling it out in terms of the line, the color, the rhythm of it, and I'm basically drawing, and I don't know what image I'm forming, and over many steps of painting over it and layers emerging, like I'll scrape some off and it'll come back into the painting. I start to have a sense of like this kind of body, almost like I'm sculpting something out, and I think I experience paint in a very material way, and so I'm really, as I move forward, I'm starting to hone in on something that's more specific than just shapes and lines and colors. It's like it's all kind of coming together, and when I know I'm done is when I feel like there's a sense of harmony, or when something feels kind of enigmatic, like there's an aspect of it that confuses me. Like this painting, for example, I didn't think it was done when I finished it, but I put it away for a little while, and I showed it to some people and talked about it, and realized that the experience that I was having with it, like there's nothing more that I could add. Adding to it would just make it different, but it wouldn't necessarily make it better. So at that point, I knew I was done. But it's really different from piece to piece.
Would you like to tell us a little bit more about the painting? Why did it make you feel that way? Like you never were able to finish it until putting it away?
I think that I'm seeking out a certain emotional charge in each of the different works, and each of them is different. And in this one, a lot of it relates to the process. The process of working on that specific painting was like, beneath it, you can see the way that the strokes are sort of, they're following through, and there's this really like vibrant like rose that's happening. Like when I was making that portion of the painting, I felt to myself like, oh, this is going really great. Like this is it was a pleasant experience. But it's really funny the way that those sort of pleasant experiences can quickly turn almost like gluttonous, and they start to feel like sickening. And I think that what happened after that with the layer that covered that sort of pleasant space of the rose was a more accurate representation of what this painting wanted to say, which it's, to me, when I look at it, it's sort of a darker, a withdrawn presence. So in that sense, it felt complete to me. But I had to have an experience with it, I guess.
And it's very interesting because your path was not straight, as you said. You know, you first studied political science and econ before going into arts. What made you do that shift, and how does, because I'm sure political science still intersects today with art for you. How does it speak to one another? How do you use both sides?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of you are sort of familiar with my trajectory, but I'll spell it out just for those that aren't. So yeah, I up until halfway through college, I had never really done art at all, and wasn't necessarily culturally familiar. I mean, of course, I grew up in New York, so I'm exposed to so much. But in my upbringing, I wasn't necessarily exposed to like a ton of art, and I didn't really make a lot of art. But then I was studying econ and political science mostly at school, and I just basically just hit like a rut. Maybe this is why, for some people, when you go to college, it's like this sort of existential thing of like, well, what do I really want to do? And I was having that moment, and art came at a time where I felt like there was a degree of space between who I thought I was, and art came in, and at first was just this really handy thing that I could do to sort of just stay afloat. But then I started to feel like there was really something to it, like I could kind of find a new sense of who I was in it, but just because of how good it felt to make it. And then as I continued, it sort of like took over, and especially when I started to look at art history and realize that there were other people that also do this. For some reason, that had never clicked in my brain before. And from that moment, I was sort of sold on it. I was like, I have to really like it, sort of do whatever I can to try to continue to do this because I'm so interested. And then to the second half of your question of how does I guess political science like come into my practice? I mean,
does it intersect in any way? Do you think about it when you work?
I think that it's complicated because art for me, as much as I want to, like when I think about politics, I think about going out there into the world and like making like writing legislation, like making change, like advocating in a very public way, versus art feels more it's behind closed doors. I mean, when you're doing it, it's like a personal thing, and then when you put the work out there, like you don't necessarily control what happens. And so there was a big switch that happened there where it went from this sort of external mode of being in the world to a more like internal place where I could, as an artist, you just, I guess, have like full control over what you're making. And so in that way, they're really different. But at the same time, I do think that it's the way that art exists in the world I'm very interested in. And I am very inspired by, I just think that when I went to a museum my first time and saw specific paintings, they completely changed my life around. And like that is a very inspiring experience that I would only hope to ever sort of give to another person. But that, you can't really control like the way that those things go.
But still, once again, you decided to do something that will change the world and change someone's opinion in one way or another. Yeah. Not with the legislation that you do it openly, but once you show it.
I guess for that one, I'll just have to say we'll see. Yeah.
I really liked when we did one of our talks while we were preparing the show. You called yourself a colorful child or something like that. You said,
oh man.
I always think about that. It was very fun also. But I actually wanted to ask you, what inspires you? Who inspire you? And what is the role of New York in your work? Because I remember first time seeing you, when you came here, you talked about the city so much, how it shaped you because you grew up here. So how does that influence your work today?
Yeah, I mean, I think as this show began to take its shape, I did start to realize more how the sort of textured environment of New York finds its way into what I'm doing. In terms of my inspirations, they're widespread. I think I often have the way that inspiration strikes me is it doesn't necessarily feel like something that I want to bring into my work. It just, moments of inspiration make me want to work. Like if I'm hit with a moment of inspiration, it makes me want to just go right back to my studio and get to work. And that can vary. I mean, I love to walk around New York, especially at nighttime. When it's a little quieter, it's sort of meditative and just take in the different structures and textures and spillages and even the noises. Like it's just sort of like the variety of that experience, but the way that it keeps a consistent like beat. Yeah, I find that meditative, and then in terms of painters, I mean, we have some of the greatest museums here in New York. So I've definitely done my fair share of going to those museums. And in the beginning, it was like I was really interested in the abstract expressionist artists. I think also particularly because their community was right where I grew up in the Greenwich Village. Like I grew up like 4 blocks from where the Cedar Tavern was, and I think it still felt personal, even though it was so long ago. Painters like de Kooning and Lee Krasner, like just that way of painting that was so much about just like showing up to the canvas and like emoting. I think that really got me in the beginning because I needed to sort of put all my intellectualism to the side for a second and just believe that I could make a painting. And then slowly it started to come back into it. But in the beginning, that was super inspiring to me. And then as well, like my friends and just like having good conversations, like deep moments where things start to feel, it's almost like you put a needle through the fabric of life a little bit, and like the moments start to feel deeper than they were. And that can be through a conversation or through a specific sort of observation. Any sort of sensation that provides that feeling, that usually makes me want to make art.
I know for a fact that you draw every morning while having tea, not coffee. Because I remember when you came here, you brought a stack of postcards.
Yeah.
Is this a practice that you continue doing still, like every morning to stay consistent?
It ebbs and flows in terms of the practice. I think at that time I was drawing every morning because I had gone through a little period of feeling really confused and lost in my work. And I think drawing is like one of the most immediate ways to just connect right to the page. A lot of times it's very like, you're just kind of doing it and seeing where it goes. And I think over time, like if I do it every day, eventually I'm going to start to feel a commonality between the works. And then I start to feel like, oh, there's a sort of more unified message here that I can maybe bring to start painting with. So drawings help me. Drawings are very grounding, I would say, just because paintings can feel very big. They can feel almost sometimes like performative, and drawings feel like scrap paper. They feel like you could crumple them up and just toss them, you know? So I get, in that sense, the pressure's off. So I love to draw. And I know I'll be drawing in the coming weeks, because especially after I put out like a body of work that feels like a sort of unified family, it's like, okay, you move on, and drawing is like the new starting place usually for me to get back into it.
And you also write poetry, which is a completely different approach, if I can assume only.
Yeah, I mean, I find I was never like a great reader growing up. I always like read, like if I was asked to read, like, what was it, Percy Jackson or Diary of a Wimpy Kid, I'm going to choose Diary of a Wimpy Kid. You know, like the image, I wanted to see a drawn out image. That just always kind of made more sense for my brain. But still, I try to sometimes, I find it frustrating and difficult, but I try to put my experiences like, or what I observe like into words. And I hardly like call it poetry, but I think it's sometimes it can feel very poetic. And I'm definitely open to many different kinds of mediums. Like I'm super attracted and thrilled by drawing and painting, but I would imagine that moving forward, there are going to be all different sorts of mediums that I want to try out just to see how they feel. Poetry being one of them, for sure.
And I would like to ask you a little bit about the name of your show, The Balancing Act. I mean, that started from these two pieces, and it builds on this duality, a double sword. How how did it come to you? Where does it come from, the idea to build a show on this construction and deconstruction, on this duality?
Well, back to, I did a show, my thesis show at Brown. I remember the last piece that I made in that show was this, it was this, these two heads, and they were stuck together, and they shared an eyebrow, and it was a red figure and a blue figure. And that was the first time that this idea had been, I mean, I guess I introduced it to myself in making that, but then slowly I started to think about that. And I think it really is like a feeling that lives internally, like the feeling of being split between two sides and not necessarily feeling like you find your identity in either, and existing more in that middle, in between space. And I think that segues to a larger belief I have, or that I feel about the self, which is like that. I think what happened when I was introduced to art is my construction of, like, my idea of like who I was started to become less singular. And I think that introducing the duality is like dealing with the idea of different parts of self, where there's like what makes us up is not necessarily like a singular force, but forces that are sort of battling it out internally. And dividing it into two sides, the red and the blue, was this sort of most concise, simple way of putting it. And I also, if you want to bring politics into it, it's like you can see it out in the world, of course. And I also think it's just kind of funny, like how our language, like the way that we say, oh, I live in a red state or I live in a blue state, like it makes so much sense, but at the same time, it's a really funny thing to say. Like and because it's just this, it's simply colors that we're talking about here. And I saw it's sort of like the root of a tree that I think expands in a lot of different directions. And it's sort of that mixture, that like the DNA strand that you can find in a lot of different, I guess, like areas of the world. And for me, in my experience, I feel them both existing in my life. The sort of pendulum swing. And I think the balancing act is finding the ability to sort of be comfortable without that sense of fixed identity, maybe, like without that, just feeling comfortable in between. And I think this painting here was sort of me thrashing it out within that space. Of course, purple, because red and blue combined in a simple sort of way. But then to me, this felt like the real rhythm, like the real engine. And the reason I called it City Spiral is because it's sort of all about change, and that change is occurring based on the interaction between these two forces. And if you want to tie in the city, like I feel like the whole identity of this place, of New York, is like it's the change, it's the constant upheaval, and these different forces, one taking over the other, taking over the other. For instance, like graffiti, which I'm really interested in. As I go around the city and I look at different pieces of graffiti, it's like it'll be up, and then the city will like paint over it, or nature will kind of fizzle it down, or it'll get weathered, but then the graffiti artist will go back up and put another one. And it's sort of this back and forth between the structures of like the artist, the one that's expressing that personal freedom, and then the city, the one that's sort of like the rule maker, the one that's making sure that there's a structured experience. And I don't think either is correct. I think that the combination of the two is what makes the city feel like alive. So that's just one example of where I feel like these mixture of forces is, can lead to basically the realization that things are always changing.
Thank you, Joey. This is the last talk, but I would love to give some time for questions from the audience. Does anyone have a question for Joey?
I'm curious which painting took the longest and which painting took the shortest amount of time.
That's a good question. That painting took the longest, but I mean, in the sense that some of these canvases, because I'm painting over them often, I keep them around, and like at that one, I started on that literal canvas while I was still at school, but I just couldn't find it. And then eventually, it came together. But I think that process where you can't find it and you keep building layers and layers and layers, I think it, in the end, which is the name of that piece, serves the painting, because it becomes this more visceral experience, not just of the image, but of the like sensation of it. Yeah.
Then there's the question, when is the moment when the painting starts?
Yeah.
Like when is this moment when it starts? Because it's never with a brush, on the canvas. The starting moment is way earlier, right? It starts like with an idea, with a thought, with the concept, and then it continues. But however, I believe that it ends with you signing the canvas on the back, and it's probably like...
No, that does feel like the end. That does feel like the end for sure. But honestly, I would say that no matter what I think, or the depth of the constructions that I can create within my mind, and if I think that's a good idea, that's a bad idea. Honestly, the beginning is just the brush, and it's starting, and like, yeah, the hand, yeah.
So maybe just at this point, because you said the brushing. So when you are in front of the canvas, in front of the white canvas, do you have already like an image of what do you want to create? Like, do you already know the title of the work? Do you already know like how the jury, like obviously, you don't know what forms it might take, but do you already kind of like really know, okay, this is going to be red and blue,
I definitely don't know the title. The titles come later, after it's done, typically. And then in terms of what it'll look like toward the end, I mean, maybe I have these little like glimpses or flashes of a moment or a set of shapes or colors that I'm intrigued by, and I'll start by trying to find whatever that flash is within my head, but soon enough that gets interrupted by something. Maybe it's an excitement of it heading in a different direction, or maybe it's a sense of it's a heaviness that I feel like it's not good enough. It's not reaching what I thought it was going to be. Either way, it leads it in a new direction. And then I feel like that's when the real stuff starts to happen, when I don't know what it's going to be. Yeah.
I love hearing you talk about red and blue. They're the stars of the show, but the more time I spend looking at these paintings, the more I'm interested in the recurring shades of green and orange that we see in a lot of these pieces. And I'm wondering if you could talk more about those colors and how they fit into the collection as a whole.
I guess the only like truly green painting is that one over there, that faucet. It's hard to really put to words why I use specific colors. I think it varies from piece to piece. I think for this body of work, yes, I'd certainly found comfort in my bases sort of being like the red, the blue, like, and purple as well. And I think when I'm painting, color, a main color of sorts is something I find comfort in. But then I think sometimes paintings can feel a little monotonous, and I want to introduce things that sort of put them on a different path. And I feel like for this body of work, like oranges and greens were almost like little spices that I put in there that I felt like just like threw off the overall rhythm, but in an interesting way, because I like when looking, I want to be able to sort of feel an overall rhythm, but then I also want to have moments where you can stop and pay attention and take in like that very specific moment of painting. So I'm interested in both experiences.
So with this process of layering and like kind of finding what the painting is going to be about through all these layers, do you ever find like a moment where you're like, this is, like, I don't want to continue with this, or do you always just find what you're looking for through adding more layers?
I have one time I cut a painting, which was bad idea. I mean, I think I had heard that Francis Bacon did it, and I was like, I'm gonna try this, but it felt like a personal assault. Like I'm not gonna do that again. But yes, there are like many moments where I feel like it's toxic and I can't move forward, or I'm just like, what am I doing? Like I'm just gonna keep like. It feels like I was saying to Loki's question, like this sort of monotony. I'm stuck in this cycle, and the cycle feels kind of dumb. I'm like, what am I doing? But then there are these little like passages or moments. It's sort of what I was saying a little bit before about like poking through that little fabric, and then like everything falls down, and all of a sudden the excitement is back, and I've found it again. But often I put things away for a while because I'll see it one way in the moment, and then 2 months later, it's like it looks completely different, or I just know where to begin again, I guess.
Yeah, going off of that, what you just mentioned, looking through the fabric, I was thinking about how you said what inspires you is the sensory experiences that kind of hooks with the fabric. Like, I'm curious how in the upheaval of the city you're able to kind of stay grounded and kind of have relation to these intense sensory experiences you're having. And yeah, what do you think the artist's role is?
I mean, well, Daniel and I were at a concert last night, actually. And it was like a thick, like there's a lot of people moving us around. And it's like you think you're going to fall off your feet, you're losing balance, and then you get caught by other people. I think that moment pops in my head based on what you just asked, because I think it's like the movement is such an important part of like staying grounded, I think. Like, I think if you're going to be here, you got to be like doing something, you know? Like you don't come here to just like look around. I mean, maybe some people do, but I feel like a lot, like when you walk outside, everyone's always going somewhere. There's a rhythm to the whole experience. And I guess I mean, maybe the artist's role is to like, or what I feel like I want to try to communicate is like the depth of that experience, that even though sometimes it can feel very surface level, it's actually like a really deep experience that's occurring. And sometimes it takes like slowing down to realize that, I guess. Yeah.
I'm curious, Joey, as you like look around paintings that you chose to like encompass this body of art, and you think about what your next show one day might look like, do you feel like you have a distinct style that sort of comes from maybe paintings that are left over from when you were in school, and sort of shapes and colors that still continue to present themselves in your works of repeat throughout?
I think, yeah, I think style for me is like more similar to like the way that your handwriting looks than a choice that you make, or like, yeah, it feels like it's a sort of not like I'm confused at how I've arrived at this particular way of painting too, I guess. In the same way that like my handwriting is just a sort of a specific way, and that's how I write. And I think I imagine that it'll evolve in different directions, but also stay the same in some ways. And I'm interested and curious about that, but I don't really know how it's all going to play out. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Julie. This was another talk.
Thank you guys for coming. All right, let's watch the Knicks game, right?